This happened about a month ago, and it was a bizarre experience, to say the least. I'm 15, and I was playing some video games before passing out. It was around 11 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ring. Out of instinct, I started walking downstairs, but about halfway there, rationality kicked in. Who the hell rings a doorbell at 11 p.m.? I silently crept back upstairs and stood in the hallway, kind of expecting something bad to happen. Exactly a minute later, it rang twice. My parents came out of their room and gave me a confused look. All I could do was shrug. Then he started banging on the door. My mom jumped at the first bang, and my dad's eyes widened, more in confusion than fear. He decided to go downstairs and peek through the peephole. It was our neighbor. My dad hesitantly opened the door, and I could hear his voice tremble slightly when he said, "Hey, what can I help you with?" The next thing I heard was a full-blown screaming match. Our neighbor was yelling that this was his house, and we had stolen it from him. My dad's uneasiness quickly turned to annoyance, and he shut the door in the guy's face without another word. He had just stepped onto the first stair, going back up when our neighbor hit the door. And I don't mean a fist, I mean full body slamming it. My dad froze for a second, stunned. Then the guy hit the door again. This time, we heard the wood start to splinter. Everyone jumped into action. My dad ran to brace the door with his body, while my mom rushed off to grab the other two kids, and I grabbed the phone and called 911. The body slamming went on for another 5 minutes. While I was still on the phone with the dispatcher, everything suddenly went quiet. I thought it was over. I felt a wave of relief, but I didn't hang up the phone just in case he started again. I peeked out the front window, just to be sure. And that's when things got worse. Our neighbor had gotten into his Jeep Wrangler. He positioned it straight toward our house. We had no idea what he was doing until he floored the gas pedal. The tires squealed. Then he slammed on the brakes just feet from our front steps. He was trying to scare us out of the house. Still on the phone with 911, I stepped away from the window to check on my siblings, cracked a few jokes to calm them down, anything to make it feel a little less terrifying. Eventually, the police arrived and arrested him. The next morning, I left for school, still rattled from the night before. When I stepped outside, I saw the tire marks leading straight up to our front door. The guy actually almost rammed his car into our house. I never want to see that psycho again, but he lives right next door, directly to my damn right. Fuck my life. I'm currently in a predicament, and quite frankly, I don't know what to do. I'll start from the beginning. 5 years ago, my next-door neighbor Charlie, or Charles as we call him, informed us that his 14-year-old son had gone missing. He reported it to the police. It was on the news. It was everywhere. My wife and I felt absolutely awful, and always offered to help them in any way we could. As the years passed with no word about their son, we assumed they had eventually come to terms with it and accepted that the worst had probably happened. My wife and I never had the nerve to ask if the body had ever turned up. Occasionally, Charles and his wife would invite us over for a barbecue during the warmer months, but neither of them was ever quite the same after their son went missing. Charles' wife, Kathy, was always quieter and more withdrawn. Charles just seemed more awkward and on edge, which is understandable to a certain extent. Fast forward to just last week. Charles came over to me while I was taking out the garbage and asked to borrow a shovel. Without hesitation, I ran to grab him my best one, not asking why he needed it. He thanked me, said he had to do some work in his backyard, and that he'd return it by tomorrow. Then he disappeared behind his house. Later, from one of my upstairs windows that has a clear view of Charles's backyard, I saw him digging. I mean, he was digging hard. He was working on a big hole, bigger than what you'd expect for simple yard work. He looked like he was struggling. He's 56, after all. I figured I'd be neighborly and grab my second shovel to help him out. When I entered his backyard and called his name, he looked up, dropped my shovel, and hurried over to me. No, it's okay," he said, almost frantic. "I got it. Please, just leave." "What's wrong with you?" "It's not a big deal," I replied, confused by his bizarre reaction. "I will not allow you to use that shovel in my backyard," he snapped, then pointed toward the gate like I was some stray dog. I was so taken aback by how he was acting that I just left without saying another word. From upstairs, I watched him again through the window. He continued digging for at least another half hour. Then he stopped. What struck me next was the way he began scanning the area, his eyes darting to neighboring windows, up and around, like he was making sure no one was watching. Before I could think to duck, he spotted me at my window. All I could do was casually walk away, pretending I hadn't been staring. Something wasn't right. I could feel it. I kept glancing into his backyard throughout the evening, but he wasn't digging anymore. I figured he knew I had been watching and was waiting for dark. I was exactly right. At 1:30 in the morning, I heard the unmistakable sound of a shovel slicing into dirt. I crept to the window, but it was too dark to see anything. So I quietly snuck outside and peeked over the fence into his backyard. There he was, still digging. I waited until he went back inside his house, then took the chance to sneak into his yard. I moved as quietly as I could toward the hole. Even in the faint moonlight, I could make out a small piece of a black garbage bag sticking out from the dirt. I looked at his back door, then back at the hole. I did this 3 more times, torn between my fear and my curiosity, deciding whether or not to find out what was inside that bag. In the end, I ran back to my yard. And it's a good thing I did, because Charles came back outside seconds later. But this time, he wasn't digging. He walked off toward the far side of his house and never came back. I went inside and quietly slipped back into bed, trying not to wake my wife. But I couldn't fall asleep, no matter how hard I tried. The next morning, the first thing I did was look out my window. The hole in his backyard was completely patched up, like nothing ever happened. I also noticed something else. His SUV, which he always parked in the driveway, was now out on the street, which was odd. I don't know what happened during the rest of that night, but I can't shake the feeling that what I saw buried in that hole might have been his son. For all I know, he dug it up to move whatever was in there, maybe to dump it somewhere far away. This is all speculation, of course. Call me crazy if you want. I haven't told anyone yet, not even my wife. And quite frankly, I don't know what to do. Charles never gave me back my shovel. I'm not going to ask for it. In fact, he's been avoiding me ever since that night. Then something happened yesterday that shook me. By pure coincidence, I looked out my window across at Charles's house and saw him standing at one of his windows, staring directly into mine. When he realized I saw him, he quickly shut the blinds. That was in the middle of the day. I'm writing this because I really have no idea what to do. And honestly, I'm fucking terrified. When I was 30 years old, I had saved enough money to buy my first house. It wasn't anything special, and honestly, all things considered, it wasn't in the best neighborhood either. But I was still proud of the accomplishment nonetheless. I met all the nearby neighbors within the first 2 weeks of moving in. Considering the area, I was surprised to find they actually all seemed pretty nice. A couple of them even invited me over for dinner a few times. Having lived in different apartments my whole life, this wasn't something I was used to, of course. Not everyone was like that. 2 houses down from mine lived a man who was probably around 50 years old. Not long after I moved in, every other night or so, this guy would knock on my front door at some absurd hour, asking for random things. The first time, he asked if I had any spare bread I wasn't going to eat. Another time, he asked if I could fill up a bucket with water, because his had been shut off. It was always strange, but not totally unreasonable. But I drew the line when he started asking me for money. I figured I had no obligation to keep meeting this guy's needs. I had just moved in and barely knew him. So I started answering the door less and less, but that didn't seem to make a difference. He still kept showing up. Fast forward to a night a few weeks later, another knock. I planned to ignore it like I had grown accustomed to doing, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw something different. The guy looked distressed. Seeing that, I decided the right thing to do was to open the door. I asked what he needed, and his response was not at all what I expected. He asked if I could come over and show him how to use his new grill. This was around midnight, which, in my opinion, is an extremely odd time to start grilling. But against my better judgment, I agreed to help him. I was into cooking at the time, and figured spending 10 minutes helping him out wouldn't kill me. I told him I'd be over in a second, just needed to put my shoes on. He thanked me and started walking back. A couple minutes later, I made my way over to his place. I opened a creaky gate and walked into the backyard. It was pitch black, but even with limited light, it was clear there was no grill. On top of that, the guy was nowhere to be seen. His back door, though, it was wide open. While I was standing outside, I called out with a nervous, "Hello?" "Yeah, I'm down here. I need your help getting some meat from the freezer." The voice came from a basement stairwell just to the left of me. It was muffled, but definitely him. I hesitated. There were no lights on down there. Actually, there wasn't a single light on in the entire house, just darkness. I leaned in and asked if he could turn on a light so I could see. There was a pause. Then came another low, muffled response from him. "No, they're broken. I can't do that." That was it. That was the moment I knew something was off. I yelled back, "I think I'm just gonna go, man." I kid you not. The second I said that, I heard footsteps sprinting up the stairs. My instincts kicked in. I turned and bolted straight back to my house, slammed the door, and locked it behind me. My heart was pounding. I peeked through the curtains, but didn't see anyone. I was terrified. I thought about calling the police, but I didn't. I figured there was no way to prove anything that had just happened. For the next few days, I didn't leave my house, except for work. During that time, I didn't see the guy, and there were no late-night knocks. Exactly 1 week later, I was talking with my neighbor across the street. The conversation eventually led to what had happened, and I mentioned I was thinking about moving because of it. But he just looked at me, confused. Then he said something that still gives me chills. "No one lives in that house. It's been abandoned for 2 years. That conversation led him to call the police. They checked the house, but found nothing inside. No signs of anyone living there. Nothing unusual in the yard or the basement. I moved out a few weeks later, and that was the end of it for me. I don't know if anything ever came of the investigation. To this day, I still don't know who the hell that guy was, or what he was trying to lure me into. After reading some of the stories on this subreddit, I feel like I'm ready to share my very creepy and uncomfortable encounter. Also, I just want to say, yes, this actually happened. It was a few years ago, but to this day I feel almost sick thinking about that night. When I was in my early 20s, I lived in some pretty shitty, albeit cheap, apartments that were known for being a little sketchy for the area. This is in the United States, by the way. There was this neighbor who always seemed to be listening to James Brown and Motown. So, even though he seemed a bit off, but I thought how weird could he really be if he's chilling to old school music? I'd hear him blast his music and have loud conversations, but then again, we both had studio apartments that shared a wall. I'd just turn my music up to drown his music out. One night, he was drinking heavily and had his girlfriend over. You could hear him being belligerent, nothing that seemed out of the ordinary for him, I suppose. It wasn't too late, so I headed out for the night with some friends while my boyfriend stayed in. I got dropped off around 1 a.m., and as we were driving into the parking lot, we saw my neighbor from a distance. He was outside, standing between the cars and the apartment, just staring at us. This guy has always been a little creepy, so I didn't really pay him that much attention. At that point, my friends were more weirded out than I was, but I didn't think much of it and had them drop me off near the entrance, since it was easier for them to leave that way. That was, until they drove off, and I had to walk past his apartment to get to mine. I swear my heart dropped. He was standing completely still by then, his body partially hidden behind a bush between our apartments, like that Homer Simpson meme, but this was not funny. It was terrifying. As I got closer, it felt like he thought I hadn't seen him. It was so dark out, and he was as still as a statue. I waved and mumbled, "Hey, neighbor," like, "Yeah, I see you, so don't even think about doing anything." It was late on a weekday, and no one else was outside. After I acknowledged him, he slowly stepped out from behind the bush and into the dim porch light. Never in my life have I looked into eyes like that. My heart is racing as I type this. They were wide, dark, fully dilated, like a wild animal. There was something primal in them. His whole energy felt off, like he wasn't even human in that moment. He didn't say anything, just gave me this bone-chilling stare. I ran into my apartment immediately. My boyfriend was drowsy since it was late, but he mentioned the neighbor's music had been loud for a while, and that he'd heard a ton of arguing and banging earlier. He didn't think anything of it. That night, we kept hearing thumps, heavy ones. It sounded like furniture being dragged or thrown around. It just weirded me out, knowing he was still awake in that state. The next morning, I heard the cops banging on his door. I was partially relieved to see them, but also terrified, because why were they there? They took him away in handcuffs shortly after demanding to be let in. An officer came to ask me when I'd last seen or spoken to him. I told them everything. The arguing, the noises, that frightening encounter outside, the thumping all night. What I found out later that day will haunt me forever. The groundskeeper shared some of the details. I'll keep it simple because it was horrendous. That Motown and James Brown loving neighbor had brutally murdered his girlfriend that night. He dismembered her and dragged what was left of her body to the train tracks behind our apartment. It hit me, and it hit me hard. That cold, wild, wide-eyed look I saw in him. That was the face of someone who had just taken another human being's life. In such a vicious, disgusting way. I felt so heartbroken for her. She didn't deserve that. She was always quiet, sweet, and clearly down on her luck. She'd sometimes ask me for a cigarette when we crossed paths. To this day, my stomach turns when I think about how close I came to death. Literally. He could have ambushed me right then and there, just out of some insane impulse. He was just waiting in the darkness when I walked up. So, to anyone who follows their gut instincts, please keep doing that. If you have a bad feeling about someone, even if they seem harmless, stay the hell away. Don't ignore your intuition. It's there for a reason. I moved out shortly after. I just couldn't be in that place anymore, knowing what had happened. That neighbor went to jail, and I saw his booking photo. It was terrifying to see his face again. I just hope he's still locked up, because that's where he belongs, for the rest of his life.